The Panzer IV was a German medium tank that was first produced in 1936. Originally designed as an infantry support tank and more of an auxiliary tank to the Panzer III, it eventually became the most built turreted German tank of World War II, with around 9,000 being produced by the war's end, with 10 variants of the Panzer IV and 12 vehicles based off its chassis, and became the workhorse for the German army due to its versatility and reliability. The standard armament for the Panzer IV was a main 7.5cm low-velocity L-24 gun. This was used from the A to the F1 variant, it then being upgraded to long-barreled 7.5cm L-43 for the F2 variant, and then finally increased to the 7.5cm L-48 for the G, H and J variants. No matter the main gun, all Panzer IVs had a coaxial MG34 machine gun and a hull-mounted MG34 machine gun, and some of the later models also had the ability to mount an anti-aircraft mounted MG34 on top of the turret for light air defence. The armour for the Panzer IV varied greatly, with the prototype variant only having a maximum of 20mm, which was only fitting for stopping small arms and shrapnel. This was quickly upgraded after the initial reports of it being too light, with the A to D variants having the armour maxed up to 30mm. It was also hardened steel, but this was still pretty light and would not hold up against anti-tank weapons. The E and F variants had their maximum armour increased up to 50mm, and many weak spots were increased as well, and finally the G, H and J variants had a maximum armour of 80mm. This more heavily armed variant of the Panzer IV really came into its own, being far more difficult for the enemy to penetrate, especially at long ranges, where the Panzer IV with its long-barreled 7.5cm gun could punch through all but the heaviest armour, even from distance. The speed and mobility of the Panzer IV also varied massively, with the prototype starting with a maximum speed of 19 miles per hour. Then the A to G variants capable of a maximum speed of 27 miles per hour. Even though they weighed more, the Germans had increased the engines, a smart choice as mobility was key to the tank's effectiveness, especially with the blitzkrieg strategy. The H and J variants with their heavy weight stressing the engine could only achieve 24 miles per hour maximum, and the overall speed was good for a medium tank and could keep pace with the assault and press the enemy hard. When it came to reliability, the Panzer IV was known for being a reliable and fairly easy to repair tank. The fact that so many were made meant maintenance crews had good experience with them, and it's said many elite SS divisions preferred this tank over Panthers and Tigers, as the Panzer IV could be relied upon to arrive at the battlefield and not break down. But how did this workhorse fare in combat? Well, its first taste of battle was the invasion of Poland. 250 Panzer IVs, the variants being a mix of A, B, C and Ds, took part, but they were in their initial infantry supporting role, dealing with fortified positions and heavy emplacements. They did very well in this role, but complaints about the thin armour were common, as Poland's AT guns and more modern tanks could easily punch through the tank. After Poland, the next engagements were France and the lowland countries. 278 Panzer IVs took part, mainly being of the D and E variants, though there was still more of an auxiliary tank sticking to their infantry support role. The fact that their 7.5cm gun could penetrate the French B1 Sumian British tanks from the side and rear meant that with superior coordination and tactics, the Panzer IV was able to eliminate this heavier and stronger enemy tank, but the German commanders noted that more heavy armament was needed in future to keep pace with the enemy tanks. The Panzer IV did take part in the North Africa campaign, but it was still the short-barreled variant, which meant it struggled against the British tanks such as the Matilda II, though its speed and reliability were put to great effect in the large open deserts. When Rommel did get access to the F2 variant with its long-barreled gun, only 27 were given to him, which he used to great effect to pulverise the Allied armoured vehicles, but due to their low numbers they could not turn around the Africa campaign, and ultimately it led to a German retreat. In Yugoslavia and Greece, 750 Panzer IVs took part in the invasion, but due to the terrain they weren't as useful as other operations, but the coaxial and hull machine guns proved invaluable with dealing with the infantry, which was the main resistance in both these nations. In Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union, the majority of the Panzer IVs available were committed. They were very effective in dealing with the Russians' light tanks such as the T-26 and T-37A, and the armoured cars and trucks they encountered. But as they began delving further into Russia, and on the way to Moscow, large amounts of T-34s and KV-1s were encountered, and the short-barreled 7.5cm gun was ineffective against their tough armour. Due to reports coming back from the front lines of the inability to deal with heavy Russian armour, the Panzer IV F2 with its long-barreled 7.5cm main gun had its production increased, as until the Tiger and Panther became available, the Panzer IV would have to carry the weight of dealing with heavy Russian armour. As the combat in Russia continued, and even with the Panther and Tiger being more widely available, the Panzer IV still had to face fierce combat against waves of T-34s and heavily armoured tanks such as IS-1 and 2s and the SU series of tanks. This began to take its toll on the Panzer IV, and losses began to mount. And by the time Germany was pushed out of Soviet territory, they had lost 6,153 Panzer IVs, which was 75% of all Panzer IVs produced. In the Western Front, with the steamroller of Allied forces bearing down on the Panzer IV, it had many tough fights ahead. In Italy, as the Allied forces invaded and gradually pushed north, the Panzer IV made great use of the terrain to ambush and engage Allied tanks, mainly the M4 Sherman, which it massively outgunned and could easily penetrate the front armour. In France, after D-Day, the Allied ground forces came thick and fast. The M4 Sherman, being the Allies' most numerical tank, faced a tough opponent with the Panzer IV, especially as on the defensive they could make great use of the French landscape for ambushes and drawing the tanks into kill zones. Allied tank losses began to mount, but as the war raged on and more heavily armoured and upgunned versions of the Sherman and Churchill tanks became available, they easily began to go toe-to-toe with the Panzer IV. And once Allied air power had 100% air supremacy, the Panzer IV became hopelessly outgunned and outmanoeuvred. As Germany fought its retreat back to Berlin, what was left of the Panzer IVs fought with absolute ferocity, but they were now severely outnumbered by Allied tanks who could only put up a resistance, even though in the end this was futile. But the Panzer IV's story doesn't end here, as even after World War II, many countries used the Panzer IV. Bulgaria kept a number operational until 1989, and Syria used them in the Six-Day War in 1967 against Israel, but they were outclassed by far more modern tanks. To me, the Panzer IV was a tank that had to adapt to the war, and even though many times outclassed by its opponents, its evolution proved to be a deadly but reliable machine that served Germany well and was a thorn in the enemy's side throughout the war.